Hi, I'm Yuri Birilov, chief editor of SKALOLAZPRO magazine, and today we have 5 questions with Friedi Kuhne. Hi Friedi.
Hi, Yuri.
First of all, please tell a few words about how did you start? Where and when did you try to walk slackline for the first time?
So I started slacklining 10 years ago when I was 20 years old. During a climbing vacation in Italy, my climbing friends had a small slackline between two trees, very short and very low at that time. And then I tried, and it was very hard in the beginning, and I failed, and I couldn't do it. And then I really wanted to conquer the slackline. And so I practiced and practiced and practiced. And when I came back from the trip at home in Germany, I bought my own slackline, and then I practiced every day.
So, can you tell a few words about your climbing background?
Yeah.
Rock climbing.
So I started rock climbing at the age of, I think, 15 or 16. But even before that, when I was a child, I was always climbing around, trees, little rocks, houses. There's pictures of me on the roof of my parents' house, and they're like, "Oh my God, come down there." But I only started real rock climbing with ropes, sport climbing. I started that when I was, I think, 16 with my friends from high school. And the same friends also introduced me to slacklining and then highlining later.
When you're pushing the limits in highlining, is it more about mental or about physical? Or both?
It's both, but I think that the mental part is a little bit more important, especially in my achievements and goals and projects, because when it comes to walking. Even when it comes to walking the longest slackline in the world, a 2.8 kilometer line, that's the longest we have ever set up. It's super physical. You have to practice for months, maybe years, to walk, to balance with your arms up and keep your arms like this for 2 hours, not taking them down. And you need to have very good breathing, super good body control, good reflexes. And but then still, that's only the base. Because all that it doesn't help you if you get scared, or if you can't really, the body should be there and strong, but it doesn't help if the mind isn't there to control and check the body and to guide it through the highline or through the climbing route. So, and especially, maybe you'll get to that topic, but especially in free solo, it's, that much more mental. Free solo is just completely
Of
mental.
course. Let's talk about the longest highline that you walked. What was harder, to set it on a place and make a good tension, or to walk it through? Because I have no idea how to set such a long
for
line.
sure. No, it's good question. It's a good question for sure. It was both super hard. Setting up the line was a team challenge. It's completely impossible to do it alone. So that was more of a team challenge. 30 people were working together to get the longest slackline up in the world, and it took like 1 week. But that's only at the location. There was months of planning and scouting beforehand, and that highlight is an exception. It's 2.8 kilometer. It was ridiculous, and it's probably not going to happen again for some years because it was so hard. So the logistic challenge was crazy, and then again, for me and the 3 other athletes, 4 people crossed this highline. The personal challenge, the mental and physical challenge, it was also crazy. So I really can't say what was harder. It was both hard in its own way. One was a team challenge and one was a very individual challenge.
You said that you have been in Russia several times.
Yeah.
Can you share some memories?
Yeah.
What records did you set here?
I have had, the first time I went to Russia was exactly 2 years ago. April 2018 was at Kislovodsk. It's in the Caucasus region.
Elbrus, yeah?
Yeah, just north of Elbrus, yeah.
I've been there.
Nice. Did you climb Elbrus?
Yes, I've been one of the participants of Red Fox Elbrus race
nice.
When you did your show. So,
when I was there.
So, yeah.
Oh, that's so funny, man. That's so funny. I was just that was very impressive for me to watch. Very inspiring, impressive race. So I started by going to a festival where I connected with the Russian slackline community and traveled around a little bit. Obviously, Russia is huge, so I only looked at one corner back then on the first visit, and then I made some friends, and then I came back a couple of times later to do some professional shows in Moscow and in Perm, and with some of these friends. The next year, April 2019, we at the Highline Festival near Kislovodsk, we set up. We found a huge canyon. We set up a 1 kilometer long highline, and then we walked it. It was the longest highline in Russia. 2 Russians walked all the way across it, and then after a couple of days of training, I put blindfold on and walked the whole distance without seeing anything. And that's right now the current blindfolded highline world record.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was awesome. But then, you know, like when it happens or after it happens, it's almost no difference compared to seeing. It's just a little bit different, but it's not a completely different world. It just, you try and then maybe eventually you will succeed. So that was the first world record in Russia. The second one of my world records that's still standing. And then also last year in October, the Moscow slacklining community, or maybe September. I think September 2019, the Moscow slackline community, people I had made friends with through my trips beforehand, they invited me to join them on a very big urban highline. So between 2 skyscrapers, you know, the tallest buildings in Europe, actually, Oko Tower and Neva Tower in Moscow. That's where I got this sweater. Basically, look, it says Moskva. It's from this event, and we set up a highline between those towers, high above the streets, 220 meters long, 350 meters high, and that's the highest that's ever been set up or walked between buildings in a city. So it's the highest urban highline, and we had like an official referee from the Guinness Book of World Records there, and they made it all official.